All right, we are doing a series called Encountering Jesus, and you can see some of my friends up here, Mary and Martha and a few others around the stage. And this is mostly from the book of John, and the purpose of this is to look at how did Jesus encounter a vast array of different people with different needs, with the idea of, I wonder if I'm in that kind of situation, how would he encounter me? And how would I encounter him? Now today, we've got some new friends that we're going to add to the mix. This comes from John chapter 2. And the setting we're going to look at is a wedding. And there's our lovely couple. Jesus is going to, at a wedding feast, do a miracle. Turn water into wine. What's the significance of that? Is it just kind of a cool thing that he did? Or is there something more in this story that we're to take away? And there is way more in the story than we're to take away from just him turning water into wine. There are 5 things that really strike me from this particular story from John chapter 2. The first is discovering who Jesus is. He's not just a teacher. He's not just a good man, just not an example, somebody we should emulate. He really didn't give us any of those as possibilities to think about him. He is God who came in the flesh, and we see this in this story. John 2 begins, on the 3rd day a wedding took place at Cana. This is a very remote town in Galilee, a very remote place of what we would consider. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Now, in the Jewish culture, a marriage was a big deal. This is like a week-long celebration, and wine was a very important part of this. Food and wine, dancing and music, joy and celebration, a festive occasion. In small towns, virtually the whole town participated in the wedding feast. So if sometime during that wedding feast they ran out of wine, this was a big deal for them. Might not be a big deal for us, but a big deal for them. And Jesus is going to, through this, perform a miracle of turning water into wine. Now, what's the meaning of the miracle? Now, we're going to look at the last verse in the story to find out what's the meaning of the miracle and then unpack the story. So what's the meaning? Verse 11 finishes this passage. This is the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Now, there are 2 words here I want you to look at. The first is the word sign. A sign is something that symbolizes something else. A sign points to something else in the New Testament. This is also true in our life. When I was in college, I went to Baylor, a small town, 100,000 people, about 3 hours from my hometown in Houston. And to go from Waco to Houston, about a 3-hour drive, I went through a lot of little towns. And you're driving along at 70 miles an hour, and you come to this town, and usually there's a sign that says 50 miles an hour. And then a sign in town, 35 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour. Now, sometimes some people who are driving in that situation, if they're 18 or 19 years old, and they're driving about 70 miles an hour, might find themselves driving into that town at 55 miles an hour instead of at the 35 miles an hour. Not anybody in particular. Let me just say that during my college years, I met a few people of the judiciary in some very small towns. And they enjoyed taking my cash and check for speeding tickets, usually something like 55 and a 35. I missed the sign, or I ignored the sign, to my own peril. It cost me. Now here, he says this is first of his miraculous signs, a sign that points to something. What does it signify? Well, the rest of the verse says, he thus revealed his glory. Now, if I was John and I was writing this passage and I'm thinking that Jesus turned a whole bunch of water into wine, I'm thinking that he did it to reveal his power or his strength, or this is the beginning of his ministry and he wants people to see that he's a miracle worker. That's what I would think. But when John says he revealed his glory, revealing strength or power or miracle worker are way too small for what he's revealing here. Here he's revealing something of his character, his identity, of who he is. And the word glory, for the most part in the New Testament, refers to God. So here, what John is saying is, he's doing this miracle, not just because we need wine for the festivities or just to show he's a miracle worker, but through this sign, his first, the people are going to get a picture of what God incarnate looks like. God in the flesh. He's going to reveal his glory. Now, again, if I'm writing this particular thing in John's place, one of the questions I'm asking is, why would he pick a wedding feast to reveal his glory for the first time? You know, if you're going to roll out something new, you wait for the big day to do that, and you give it everything you got. So I would say, well, why not like what we studied last week with Lazarus, raising somebody from the dead after they've been in the cave for 4 days with a lot of people around? That would be the one I'd pick. Or why not the feeding of the 5,000? We've got about 5,000 men, maybe 10,000 others who are there, women and children, 15. That would be the place to reveal your glory, I would think. Why would he do this at a wedding feast? Let's look at the second thing. The second thing inside your handout is we discover through this the connection that he wants to build between you and I. And that connection is a picture. It's an image. And that is of bride and groom. Bride and groom. Now let's look at the rest of the story. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, and I love this, the Jewish mother taking control of things, said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." And they did so. The master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside, and he said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine, like Boone's Farm, after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best until now." Now, what's going on in this story here? What is Jesus up to? Now, there's a particular fellow named the master of the banquet. You might think of him as the event coordinator, a wedding coordinator, or in this particular case, the reception coordinator. And Jesus watches this situation where it's his job to make this a festive place for everyone and enjoyable, and it's going south quickly. And I wonder if in his mind he thought about a day when he would be the event coordinator for just such an event. A wedding coordinator, a reception coordinator that was going to involve a whole lot more people than just the folks that lived in Cana. And that he was going to be providing something for them. Now, most of the time when you and I think about the gospel, we think about things like sin and forgiveness of sin. I'm not going to hell. I'll be going to heaven someday. And I am certainly glad for all of those things. Believe me. But those are really not what I think of as final things. There's something more that God is wanting to do than just get me to a place. He's wanting to get me to a kind of place with a kind of life in it and a kind of relationships. Something more than just saved and now bored. For example, let's say that the youth group was going to go to Magic Mountain. Not our youth group, but let's say a senior class at a high school. And they're going to make a weekend of this. Thing's going to cost $200. And one of the students, let's say it's you, has grown up in a family that week by week we are barely eking by. and you would love to go on the senior class trip to Magic Mountain for a weekend with everybody you know. But you already know we never have enough money for this kind of stuff. There's not a chance in the world of me getting to go. But let's say that one of your friends realizes you're not going to go because of finances. And one of your friends gives you their ticket that they had to save up money for. Would it honor your friend on that weekend to go into the gates of Magic Mountain and then just inside the gate find a little bench there and just sort of stew that you never have money to do things like this? Or that, well, yes, I'm in Magic Mountain, but my friend is home and he's not getting to enjoy with all his buddies. Is that the point? You're in Magic Mountain. You got there. The purpose of the ticket and giving it to the friend is that you can enjoy all the attractions and rides, the carnival, the games, the food, with your friends. That's the point. That's the final thing. And what Jesus is pointing here to, I think, is, you know what, folks? What better image than a wedding, a bride and a groom, to give an image, a picture of what's ahead and what I'm trying to do for my people someday. The book of John picks up on this very similar image. We might call it of coming attractions. Then the angel said to me, "Write, blessed are those who are invited where? To the wedding supper." Now that's in heaven, and I'm glad to be going to heaven. Make no mistake about that. But it's more pointed than that. It's more specific than that. The wedding supper of the Lamb. These are the true words of God. So what do we have so far in this story? The discovery of who Jesus is, and the discovery of the kind of connection he's trying to build between himself and you and I. The images of bride and groom. Third, discovering what he came to do, and that is to provide our ultimate joy. What did he come to do? I wonder if at this particular place in the story, if Jesus' mind went back to an Old Testament prophecy. He was watching this take place. I wouldn't be surprised if his mind went to Isaiah. On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine and the best of meats and the finest of wines. It's almost as if you can hear him say, this is what I want to do. I want to provide exquisite joys that my people will delight in someday. And they will delight in with each other. And the particular words and images he uses are words that evoke, in our experience, something of joy and delight. Being invited to the mountain, a feast, rich food, banquet, aged wine, best of meats, finest of wines. Now, someday in heaven, I'm going to enjoy the richest of his joys. It'll include some of these things, but it's going to be a whole lot more than that. But heaven is not just about, the joy of heaven is not just about joys and delights. But there's something else that Isaiah points to that we have to look forward to. The very next verse says, on this mountain, he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. Now, it's not just that we're going to be rich and delighted in and pleasures there and enjoy each other's company superbly. But the underside of that is there's something different. All of us have baggage and skeletons in our closet and things we wish we hadn't done. And sometimes we ourselves have brought suffering upon ourselves, and sometimes we have brought suffering upon other people, including the ones we claim to love the most. And it's easy to sort of carry those things around, and you remind yourself that, well, God forgave me, and God forgave others who have done those things to me in this life. But in heaven, what Isaiah seems to point to is something more than that. That God himself is going to redeem all of these things. He's going to renew these things. Even the worst times of suffering, the hardest agonies, when you've been on your face before God or awake at night, midnight, wondering, how could I have been so stupid, or how could somebody have done something like that to me? Even those things are going to become part of what he's going to do. And the image he has here is of a shroud or a sheet that covers what we don't want to see, or what we don't want to face, or what we don't want to have done. And the picture is he's going to reach down and grab that shroud and yank it back and take it away. In other words, he's going to redeem the very things that brought us shame, or that we might still feel guilty about. And then verse 8, he will swallow up death forever. What an image. Here's this god-awful thing called death. What's he going to do with that? He's going to reach over and grab that sucker, and down the hatch it goes. Never to be seen again. I mean, I really can't think of a more stirring image or full image than that. Death is one of those things that is hard. He's going to redeem even that. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces, the hurts that we've gone through, the pain we've gone through. He will remove the disgrace of his people. The things that you feel like you have skeletons in the closet, wish you hadn't done, and other people know, and you're sort of ashamed of that. He's going to reach down and he's going to remove that from us. From all the earth, the Lord has spoken. Fyodor Dostoevsky was a fellow that I read a little bit of when I was in college. He was a Russian Christian and one of the best Russian authors that the country put out. One of his books is called The Brothers Karamazov. And Ivan Karamazov, a fictional character, is sort of mulling over this same thing here that we're talking about. Can God really redeem in heaven even the worst of things that we've done or that have been perpetrated on us? Is that possible? Does joy not just include delightful things, but redeemed things? And this is what he writes. I believe, like a child, that suffering will be healed and made up for. That all the humiliating absurdity of human contradictions will vanish like a pitiful mirage. That in the world's finale, at the moment of eternal harmony, something so precious will come to pass that it will suffice for all hearts, for the comforting of all resentments, for the atonement of all crimes, of all the blood that they've shed, that it will make it not only possible to forgive, then listen to this, but to justify all that happened. Is it possible that God could really do that? Revelation has the same idea. He was seated on the throne and said, I am making everything new. This is what I think he means. And in your handout, joy is not just the presence of pleasures met. It's also the joy of suffering that's redeemed. The point pictures the bride and groom, but even more specific than that, a certain kind of joy. Now, the fourth thing that I take from this story is discovering the bride's preparation. You and I just don't become a bride and that's the end of it. We just show up. It doesn't just happen. It takes a lot of preparation to get us to the place where we can show up for that wedding. Let's look back at the story. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Dear woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding for 20 to 30 gallons. Now, why did he tell them to go get those jars? 6 stone jars used for ceremonial washing. Ceremonial washing was when somebody would come over to the house or you would come home and you wanted to eat dinner or a meal with clean hands. It was more than just cleaning your hands. You were saying to the family, I live as a forgiven person. I have been purified. God has done His work to purify me. The closest we get is saying grace before a meal. But that's really kind of about as close as we get. Why didn't He tell the servants, you know those wine jars that are now empty? Go fill those up with water. Because I'm going to turn the water in those wine jars back to wine. Could have done that. He could have said, you know what, would you go get some water jars? Fill them up with water. Bring them back. Got something I want to do with them. Why did He pick the ceremonial jars to turn the water into wine? Next verse. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. He said, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so. The master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside. What does it take to purify us? In those days, in the Old Testament days, they used symbols of purity to purify. One was water, ceremonial cleansing and washing, and they had separate jars for those things. But it was the kind of thing that had to be done every day because we're sinners. We screw up. And every day we mess up and we have to be purified once again. We try to purify ourselves by different ways in our culture. Think about Adam and Eve. They sinned against God and they tried to purify themselves in two ways. They ran away and hid, and they made fig leaves. In other words, the direction that they took and the direction we take when we mess up is to hide our faults and failures before God and before others especially, and to hide behind something like fig leaves. Now, the hiding itself, we talk about is denial. How's it going in your life? Oh, it's going great. I always want to say, really? Really? I mean, that's a hard question for me to answer. How's it going, Seth? It usually takes me a while to unpack that question. Everything's going great. Or you talk to some Hollywood star about their career and say, well, do you have any resentments? Or any regrets? No regrets. I'm thinking, really? You have no regret? I had regrets about how I lived last week. This is denial. Denial. Sometimes we make our fig leaves be nice clothes or a nice car or a nice house we live in. Sometimes we brag about our kids. Sometimes we brag about our sports exploits or about our business successes. All of those things we do without hardly even knowing we're doing it to keep us on guard, to hide the cracks so that nobody can see those weaknesses in us. Now, you and I do that all the time. We do it every day. And you know what? You know what that's called? And what that produces? Stress. You might think stress is because I'm overly committed with time. Well, maybe. But you don't have to be overcommitted at time to live a stress-filled life. We feel this more when we go to the relative's house. Everybody's got to be all buttoned up, looking good, being sharp, being polite. That's stressful. That produces stress. Now, you and I can try to purify ourselves that way if we want to. But you've got to do that every day. Instead, what we need is a one-time purifying with lots of daily reminders that we've been purified. In other words, what we don't need is ceremonial cleansing water. We need Christ's cleansing blood in order to make us ready for that day. The last thing we discover is the groom's cost. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. And then this is one of those things that can sound a little odd. Dear woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my time has not yet come. Now, the word woman in the Greek is a word of respect. It's sort of like what people in England, when they use the way they use the word lady. It's a respectful title. And then he adds the word dear, which is a term of affection. Why do you involve me? She sees there's reason for involvement. They're out of wine. You can do that. But that's not what he's thinking. There's a disconnect between what she's thinking and he's thinking. Because what he says is, my time has not yet come. Now, what does he mean by that? There are plenty of times in the Gospels where he uses the phrase, my time or my hour, to describe his coming arrest, torture, crucifixion, and resurrection. My hour, my time. There are plenty of examples in the Gospels where he doesn't do a miracle or where he doesn't say something or answer a question because my time is not yet at hand. Now, I wonder what's going through his mind. I wonder if he's thinking about one day coming, I'm going to be sitting around a table with these 12 guys. And for ages to come, people are going to call this the Lord's Supper. And he could see that goblet. And he could hear himself saying these words, this is my blood poured out for you. Drink this in remembrance of me. But I think more to the point where it relates to, dear woman, why do you involve me? I think it's this. He knows that if he comes out and does a sign or a miracle, that is going to have the attention of the enemies in Israel, and they are not going to like this, and he is going to have a target on his back at the very beginning of his public ministry. It's almost as if he's saying, Mother, you have no way of knowing this, but if I do this now, I'm going to create a hornet's nest of people of men who are going to be after me. And is it that time already? Almost a rhetorical question. Do we have to start now with this? But he realizes that what better time to do that than at a wedding? What better image than at a wedding celebration? But it's going to cost him tremendously. Think about this. He wants to give you and I rich joy, but it's only going to come at the loss of his joy. He wants to purify us, but that will only come as he takes the stain of our sins and puts it on himself. We will never love him or see his love as bridegroom until we see him as a common criminal hanging on a cross. Then we will begin to think, wow, maybe he loves me. We will never see that he's trying to create a festival for us in heaven. But it will only come at the cost of him being ostracized and rejected and murdered. And we really won't see our place in heaven. It won't happen unless he takes a taste of our hell. It's going to cost him something. But all of this begins, this whole picture, whole story, very fitting, with a wedding proposal of God to you. Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and he with me. How fitting. A proposal. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, would you lift up our eyes to see the wonder of who you are, your glory. Help us to see the picture, put that image in our mind of bride and groom, that kind of love that you have for us and that we can enjoy. And that the purpose of this is finally for our enjoyment with you and with one another. Until then, you have a lot of work to do in each one of us to make us ready for that day, that wedding day. And sometimes that work is hard. But please do your good work in us. Prepare us as you see fit. And Lord Jesus, we thank you for coming and the great cost that you paid. Though you were rich, you became poor.